Hi, hello, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Sarah and I am a beginner artist sharing my journey and hoping to inspire and help others with some of the lessons I'm learning through this. And I encourage you to check out my first video. I'll link it in my description if you want to learn a little bit about me, but my motto is it's never too late and do things that make you happy. But in this video, I'm going to talk through steps I took and lessons I've learned as I created this lion piece in graphite. I really enjoyed this piece and seem to have a preference to drawing big cats for some reason, because I've been doing them quite a bit, but I used a lot of different materials between various, pencils, blending tools, brushes, erasers, but I will put a list of those in the description for the video. I do want to give a shout out to Andrew Liu, L-I-U, for my photo reference, which I did get off of unsplash.com, which is a great site for free, non-trademarked images. That was for my reference. I will say if your reference photo is in color, you should switch it to black and white if you can, if you're planning on working in black and white, because it's much easier and you can even amp up, say, contrast and shadows and things like that. If you need to. So I will add a disclaimer, this is not a step-by-step tutorial. I try my best to try to line up what's happening in the video to what my voice is saying, but it doesn't always work out that way. But my intent is just to kind of share those key things that I'm learning as a beginner artist and talk through a little bit of my process. But I hope you enjoy learning along with me. So with the sketch, I've had some questions on my process for that. I've heard about different methods, like using a grid method. I don't know, that's not my cup of tea. I like to use my reference photo quite a bit if I'm doing these photorealism pieces, and I use a ruler to plot out landmarks that I see, so I can kind of basically connect the dots, and then of course use my eye a bit and get that initial sketch down. It doesn't have to look perfect in this first sketch, just really that the placement of the eyes and the nose are so important, because if those are off, it seems like everything's important, but if those are off, it seems like everything is just a mess. So I really measure a lot getting those down. You'll notice that I'm erasing the sketch once I put it down. You can still see it very lightly, but once you have that initial sketch down, the reason why you want to do that is I've found that if you don't, as you play your layers down, any graphite that's already down is just going to keep packing on more graphite, right? So that line will become really harsh, and that's just not realistic looking, right? So you want to fade out that. You can use an eraser or you can rub it out with tissue or whatever. I did use the eraser. And then I will start using some graphite powder, which I created by rubbing a graphite stick on some sandpaper and then picking it up with my blending stump. As I get to the eye, I map out any highlights that I see. I'm shading in the pupil or the darkest areas, and then with a light layer, and then I'll come in with a smaller blending stump to blend those out. I will go in with an eraser to make sure I keep that highlight in the eye and don't make it too dark. Once I get that first layer of the eye down, I move on to getting the rest of my first layer down. Some artists I've seen or watched tutorials on, they work in sections, which is fine if that works for you, meaning that they'll start on the ear and completely do the ear and then move on to the next part. I like working in layers because I feel like I have a little more control and knowing what, if I'm using color, what colors I'm using, or if I'm shading, what pencil shades I'm using and what pressure, and getting that across. Because if I go in sections, I might forget, especially if I get up and leave it and then come back to it, say even the next day, I might not remember exactly what I was using. So it just seems more cohesive when I'm working in layers. So I prefer that. So you will want to get your background down pretty early in the process as well. You could even start with the background if you wanted to. I didn't for some reason with this one. I do that a lot. In this piece, I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. Start getting it down, and then I switched over to my 2B pencil using kind of the side of the lead to get an initial layer down, because I wanted it to start lighter, because it's always better to start lighter and then build up where you want to. And it was getting too dark with the powder, so I switched. But you might notice I'm holding the pencil pretty far down at certain points, down as far as being the end of the pencil up towards you. I do this when I don't want a lot of pressure or less graphite needs to be going down. So I prefer that. So you will want to get your background down pretty early in the process as well. You could even start with the background if you wanted to. In this piece, I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a makeup brush. I started with graphite powder with a soft brush. It was a And when I want a darker line, I'll hold the pencil closer to the paper. But once you get that initial layer down, you might have saw me rub that out with some tissue for blending. You can use toilet paper, whatever you have handy, really. But when it comes to pencil work, I've learned it is most important to get the dark values down in the correct place. So I do measure a lot to make sure I'm getting those darker values down correctly. And then just to try to get more of that realistic look, I'm looking at my reference quite a bit and still laying down those darker layers in the direction that the fur is going that I'm seeing. I hope that makes sense. But I've learned if you try to do things from memory versus looking at your reference, you're most likely going to be wrong, and then it's not going to look correct. So I often use blending stumps versus pencils, especially in the beginning. I'll use pencils more for smaller detail areas, like maybe the eyes, and then later when I'm doing more of the finer attention to detail, but blending stumps are my primary tool probably in those first couple layers. You might see the video jump a little bit. That's for sake of time. I had to kind of fast forward a little bit to try to keep this to a reasonable length, but I apologize for that if it suddenly jumps. At this point in the piece, I've gotten down that lighter layer of graphite pretty much over the entire piece. This way, once I have that down, I can actually go in and use the eraser as a drawing tool to bring back out those lighter kind of fur texture that I'm seeing in the piece. One thing I will say, like as far as a lesson learned, is to be careful what brushes you're using to apply any kind of powder, because the brushes, if they're too hard or too firm, can leave lines of graphite on the paper, and they're really hard to erase for some reason once they're down, especially when you're using a nice textured paper like this Pastelmat paper. Another tool that really varies on results, it seems, depending on paper, is the erasers. I found that some erasers work better depending on the paper, and especially how many layers you already have down. For example, the Pastelmat has that texture, so it really holds on to that graphite, and my kneaded eraser, that's the one that kind of feels like Play-Doh, does not work great once a couple layers are down, but my electric eraser works really great. But I have to be careful because you'll really wear down that paper pretty fast using an electric eraser on it. I seem to have some trouble getting my mono eraser, which is like a rubber eraser, to pick up in some of the areas, and I was finding that the gum eraser was working better, so I at one point cut that down a piece off and cut it to so I can have a point on it to get some of those hair details. Once I have the lighter areas mapped out, I'll be going back in with a darker pencil. I was using a carbon pencil here, is what I was just showing, and I am really wanting to amp up those dark areas now. A lesson I've learned is some people, in the past, I would say for myself, I would maybe stop at this point and think, okay, those areas are dark enough, but really you want to really pump up that dark area of your piece, because it just makes it look so much better. Might just be afraid to do that because, if you go too dark and then it's hard to go back, you're afraid to ruin it, but it really brings out all the dimension and whatnot of the piece. So I highly recommend doing that. That was a lesson I had to learn with getting more and more comfortable to lay down that darker pencil. But you'll work up in layers. So we got some dark down, then you blend it out, and then we got the lighter down and blend that out. So you're really working up in layers. You'll just hear me talk about layers. I talk about this a lot. But get it down, then blend, get down, then blend until you get to what you like. So then once you get to kind of that final layer, after you've given some attention to those darker areas like I'm doing right now, and mapping out the nose a bit more and double checking some of those dark areas, I also want to make sure I emphasize the importance of the eraser tools, because when you're doing a black and white piece like this, the lighter areas really bring together a lot of the detail, including like the fur, and using shadow behind the light to amp it up is an important part of bringing out those details. Like, so in the lion, there's a lot of white in the chin on this one. So I went in and made sure I amping up the dark under the chin and adding little shadow areas between hairs on the chin to help the white of that stand out, which will show towards the end a lot more. But now we'll start putting down, I keep saying we, it looks like you're here with me. We'll start putting down the hair detail. I do use the 6B pencil quite a bit for this. It's literally putting down all those little individual hairs, which can be quite time consuming. And, you do have to have a bit of patience for that, but it's better to start, I think, with those darker fur details. Oh, and the hearts are showing you that this is the point where I get excited because I'm seeing the piece come together, like coming to life, basically. I'm like, oh, there you are. I see it now. And I get pretty excited. So I wanted to add the little heart moment that I feel in my heart when I start to see that. Back to what I was saying. So I used the 6B to put down most of those layers, and I'm putting down hair. And here I would really emphasize like the importance of following your reference and the way the hair is laying and laying the hair down in a pattern versus like just going in straight lines. Maybe I'll do another video on doing fur, but you just don't want to lay the lines down side by side like the whole way through, because it's not going to look realistic at all. And because they do change direction quite a bit if you're looking at a reference photo. So I start with that 6B, and then I will put a layer of that down over the entire piece using my line details, and then might even use like dot details on top of the nose where the hair is really kind of fine and small. Doesn't look like lines as much. We're talking about a cat, that bridge of their nose, those little tiny hairs. But once I get down that first darker layer, I do go in and blend it out, which you might think, what was the whole point of spending all that time? It's about an hour of putting down all these little hairs, and then blending them out. Well, it looks a lot more realistic and soft because, if I left it just as these harsh kind of rough lines, it just doesn't look as great. So you'll see me do all of that work and then go over with my Sofft tool applicator. Almost looks like an eye makeup brush, but it's not. It's a brand called Sofft, Sofft. They're actually used a lot with pastels, but I have found that they work really great for blending out charcoal and graphite as well. So yep, here I'm still putting down all those little itty bitty pencil strokes. I'll switch up between tools quite a bit at this point as I see things I want to fix. I go back with an eraser, but taking my time to really just lay all of those down. That darker layer first, and then I'll go back, blend it, like I said, and then I'll put a lighter layer, like my 2B pencil. I even use a mechanical HB pencil at one point to get in really fine lines. Just to really get all that fur detail down. I find it relaxing and kind of meditative at this point, putting down all these lines. I'll just kind of be listening to music or watching having a show on in the background or listening to one of my favorite podcasts, and I can just kind of zone out on this for hours. And then you're going to see me coming in with that Sofft tool that looks like, there it is. I just really like this tool. The sponge is really soft, a lot softer than using the blending stumps. And I like it when I'm at this point in a piece, because it just really blends out all of those harsher lines that I just made with all the fur really nicely. So once I get that blended out, I'm going to be going back in again with my darker pencil, because again, I'm going to try to amp them up because I've blended them out a bit. Here in a moment, you're gonna hopefully notice a kind of different looking tool. It's got a purple handle. It's one of my embossing tools that I'm using, that I actually wrapped a piece of the kneadable eraser to the end of. Using that to try to get in tiny little areas and just pull up a little bit of the graphite where I got a little too dark. So that's what that is when you see that purple handle tool. As I was getting to the end here, I noticed that those indents that I made with my embossing tool for the whiskers kind of did fill in just a little bit. I think I should have pushed a little harder, lesson learned. So I go back over them with an eraser at the very tip of a eraser to try to amp up those whiskers a little bit that you're seeing. And as I get to the end, I'm going to be taking one of my harder pencils. It's a 4H pencil. And you'll see me kind of rub over the entire piece with that pencil. I saw this technique in another video and actually really liked it. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing. I'm sure there's a technical thing that it's doing that artists understand, but just putting that light layer of that 4H pencil over the whole thing just really just makes it pop just that little bit more. And so I do that here in a moment. You're gonna see that. And then the fun part of getting to tear off all that tape, and there we go, at making sure, of course, you sign your piece, and then you have your masterpiece done. And I really enjoyed making this piece. I hope you liked the video, and I'm getting better and better at learning how to record these, but I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll tune in next time. And thanks for sticking around. Thanks.